The first thing that struck me about humans was how unimpressive they looked. I, Vextrol, junior diplomatic observer of the Azuran Collective, had spent 3 cycles studying xenobiology in preparation for this assignment. The educational materials described humans as adaptive omnivores with remarkable endurance, but limited natural defenses. Propaganda, I assumed. Every species exaggerates their strengths in official documentation. But as I watched the human delegation enter the grand chamber of the Galactic conclave aboard Station Harmony, I fought to conceal my disappointment. Their lead diplomat, Sarah Chen, stood barely to my thoracic plate, with limbs like smooth, slender reeds that seemed as though they might snap in our artificial gravity. No protective carapace, no secondary limbs, no natural weaponry visible. Just soft, vulnerable skin in various shades of tan and brown, partially covered by ceremonial fabrics. "Remember, observer," Commander Krestol rumbled beside me, his mandibles clicking in amusement. "Appearances deceive. These creatures somehow survived their evolutionary crucible without developing proper defenses." "Then how did they achieve spaceflight, Commander?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Their minds compensate for their physical inadequacies," he answered. "They're problem solvers. Clever, but gentle. They abhor violence, which makes them ideal trading partners." I recorded his assessment in my neural implant. The Azuran Collective valued strength above all else. Our 4-meter frames and chitinous battle plates had carried us to dominance across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. But even the High Command recognized the strategic advantage of allying with species that possessed complementary traits. The human delegation arranged themselves at the curved negotiation table with practiced precision. Their every movement seemed rehearsed, a compensation, I presumed, for their natural lack of grace. When Sarah Chen spoke, her voice was melodic but soft, requiring audio enhancement for proper reception by the larger species present. "The Earth United Governance extends gratitude for this opportunity," she said, her small, 5-fingered hands making gentle gestures. "We believe mutual cooperation will benefit all civilizations represented here." I recorded diligently, noting the typically conciliatory human approach. No demands, no display of strength, just earnest appeals to shared interests. Their strategy relied entirely on the protection offered by diplomatic norms. How terrifying it must be, I thought, to navigate the cosmos without natural defenses or even the pretense of martial capability. The Draxian ambassador, a gelatinous mass of sensory tentacles, oozed contempt. The human territories border crucial hyperspace lanes. What assurances do we have that human weakness will not invite aggression from the Krell Dominion? We cannot ally with species that might become easy conquests. A reasonable concern. The Krell, a warrior species almost as formidable as Azurans, had been expanding aggressively along the galactic rim. Commander Krestol tensed beside me. The question verged on diplomatic insult. Sarah Chen's expression remained unchanged, but something shifted in her posture, so subtle I nearly missed it. 1 second she seemed small and yielding. The next, she somehow occupied her limited space more efficiently. "Ambassador," she replied, voice still soft yet somehow reaching every corner of the chamber without amplification. "Humanity's commitment to peace should not be mistaken for an inability to defend our interests." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "We have not engaged in interspecies conflict because we choose cooperation. This is wisdom, not weakness." As she spoke, her hand drifted toward the ceremonial knife placed before each delegate, a conclave tradition. My neural implant automatically calculated the movement, too casual to trigger security protocols, too deliberate to be random. Her slender fingers hovered near the hilt with the unconscious familiarity of someone who understood weaponry intimately. The Draxian's tentacles recoiled slightly. A coincidence? It had to be. Everything in my training indicated humans were physically unremarkable, their only notable trait being their aversion to violence. Then it happened. The Mendari representative, with their notoriously clumsy lateral appendages, accidentally sent the ceremonial blade spinning across the table, directly toward Sarah Chen's exposed hand. Time seemed to slow. My combat-enhanced vision captured every millisecond. The knife rotating 720 degrees in flight, its ceremonial edge catching the light from the artificial sun panels above. By all physical laws, the human should have jerked back, the blade embedding itself in the synthetic wood, or worse, the soft flesh of her hand. Instead, her fingers moved with precision that defied my sensory processing. She caught the blade, not by the handle, but by pinching the flat of the blade itself between her forefinger and thumb, arresting its momentum completely. The movement was so swift, so controlled, that several delegates appeared not to notice anything unusual had occurred. But I saw, and in the brief moment before she gently replaced the knife on the table, our eyes met. What I glimpsed there contradicted everything in my diplomatic briefings. There was no fear, no relief at avoiding injury. Only a cold, calculating awareness, the eyes of a predator assessing whether its cover had been compromised. The moment passed. Sarah Chen resumed her diplomatic overtures, as if nothing had happened, her voice once again soft and accommodating. But I couldn't unhear the unspoken message in her earlier words. We choose cooperation, which implied they could choose otherwise. The diplomatic shuttle to Proxima II carried representatives from 7 species, all potential signatories to the Galactic Resource Sharing Initiative. The journey should have been uneventful, a 5-day cruise through well-patrolled space to a developed border world. I spent most of the first 3 days observing Sarah Chen from a professional distance. My suspicions about the knife incident had begun to fade. Perhaps my combat-calibrated senses had exaggerated her reflexes. After all, she spent hours each day in tedious preparation meetings, reviewing agricultural production statistics and mineral extraction quotas with the methodical patience stereotypical of her species. On the 4th day, as we passed the Cygnus expanse, the ship's alarms blared. Multiple vessels approaching from Vector 963 announced the Illyrian navigator, their phosphorescent skin pulsing with anxiety patterns. Configuration matches Krell warcraft. They're not responding to hails. Commander Krestel immediately took command of our security detail, 12 elite Azuran warriors, each worth 20 soldiers of lesser species. Battle stations. Prepare for potential boarding actions. The human delegates huddled together, faces displaying the fear response typical of prey species, all except Sarah Chen, who calmly accessed a data terminal. The nearest patrol is 40 minutes away, she announced. We should prepare for the worst. The attack came with typical Krell efficiency. Their boarding craft punched through our hull in 3 locations, disgorging armored warriors into strategic sections of the ship. Our security forces engaged them immediately, but we were outmatched. Krell combat doctrine emphasized overwhelming force applied with brutal precision. I was escorting the diplomatic contingent to the emergency pods when the ship lurched violently. Support beams crashed down around us, and the deck split open with a shriek of tearing metal. Several delegates were crushed instantly. The survivors scattered in panic. When the dust settled, I found myself trapped in a partially collapsed service corridor with a badly lacerated thoracic plate and Sarah Chen, who appeared uninjured but disheveled. We need to reach the escape pods on level 3, I said, attempting to stand despite the pain lancing through my carapace. Sarah placed a hand on my thoracic plate, the pressure surprisingly firm. Stay down, Vex Troll. Your hemolymph is leaking through that crack. The pods are gone anyway. That last hit was aimed at the escape bay. How can you know that? I demanded, mandibles clicking in distress. She didn't answer, instead examining our surroundings with unsettling intensity. Her attention fixed on a maintenance panel, which she pried open with unexpected strength to reveal a tangle of circuitry and fluid conduits. What are you doing? I asked as she began methodically disconnecting components. Improvising, she replied, stripping insulation from wiring with her teeth. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor beyond our collapsed section. The distinctive three-beat gait of Krell shock troops. Sarah froze, her head tilting slightly like a sensory apparatus orienting toward input. "One scout," she whispered. "Advance patrol. Heavy class warrior." I reached for my ceremonial staff. A poor weapon, but better than nothing. "We must prepare to defend." Before I could finish, Sarah transformed. There's no other word for it. Her posture shifted, muscles tensing beneath her diplomatic attire. She extracted a slender metallic cylinder from her sleeve, some kind of compressed tool I hadn't noticed during security screening. "Stay silent," she instructed, voice now carrying a harmonic overtone that bypassed my translator implant entirely, some sub-vocalization technique I'd never encountered. The footsteps grew closer. A massive shadow fell across the rubble blocking the corridor. 7 feet of armored Krell warrior began forcing its way through the gap, plasma lance at the ready. The creature's compound eyes swiveled, immediately spotting us in the dim emergency lighting. "Pray," it clicked in the Krell battle tongue. "Surrender for processing." I prepared myself for death with the dignity expected of an Azuran official, but Sarah Chen, the gentle human diplomat, was already moving. She flowed across the debris like water finding its path downhill, her movements possessing an economy of motion I'd only seen in apex predators. The metallic cylinder in her hand extended with a soft click, becoming a slender, pointed implement. The Krell warrior raised its lance, but Sarah was inside its guard before the weapon discharge. Her improvised spike found the precise juncture between the warrior's neck plates, a vulnerability I hadn't known existed in Krell anatomy. The creature made a wet, gurgling sound as Sarah twisted the implement, severing something vital. Purple Krell blood sprayed across the wreckage as the massive body collapsed. Sarah withdrew her weapon in a practiced motion that minimized the splash radius. Not a drop touched her. She turned back to me, and I recoiled instinctively. Her eyes had changed, or perhaps I was only now seeing them clearly. They were calculating, measuring, utterly devoid of the hesitation one would expect after taking a life. "We need to move before its squad mates come looking," she said, wiping her improvised weapon on the Krell's own garment before collapsing it back into the innocuous cylinder. "Can you walk, or do I need to stabilize that wound first?" My mandibles worked silently for several seconds before I found my voice. What are you?" A smile flickered across her face, not the diplomatic one I'd seen for days, but something ancient and predatory. "I'm exactly what I've always been, Vextral, a human who prefers peace." She emphasized the final word in a way that made my carapace tighten involuntarily. "Prefers, not requires. This will hurt." Sarah pressed a salvaged medical patch against my thoracic fracture without waiting for a response. Searing pain flooded my nervous system as the alien coagulant contacted my hemolymph, but the bleeding stopped almost immediately. We had retreated deeper into the maintenance sections of the crippled ship, navigating through crawl spaces I would have considered too small for efficient movement. Sarah led with surprising confidence, as though she had memorized the vessel's schematics. "How did you kill that warrior so easily?" I asked when the pain subsided enough for speech. The vulnerabilities of Krell anatomy are classified information. Sarah was inventorying the items she'd collected from the dead Krell and various debris. The plasma lance, her bloodied spike, a handful of power cells, and components stripped from ship systems. "Not my first Krell," she answered simply, examining the lance's charge indicator. "Impossible. Humanity has no official contact with the Krell Dominion." The diplomatic corps. "Officially, yes." She began disassembling the plasma lance with practiced ease. "But space is vast. Borders are porous, and conflicts happen beyond the view of diplomatic records." "You're not really a diplomat." The realization crystallized in my mind. Sarah's hands paused briefly. "I am exactly what my credentials say. Senior Earth Diplomatic Corps, specializing in first contact scenarios and cross-species negotiation." She resumed her work. I just had a different career first. Military. Diplomatic Security Special Forces. She extracted the power core from the plasma lance and connected it to a ship's communication node she'd salvage. We protect Earth's representatives in hostile environments. By becoming expert killers. By being prepared for worst-case scenarios. The jury-rigged device hummed to life. In human history, diplomats who couldn't protect themselves often ended up as object lessons. She positioned the device near the bulkhead and turned her full attention to me. "Your species has a fundamental misconception about humans," she said. "You think our evolutionary path made us weak because we lack natural weapons. The opposite is true. We evolved as persistence predators." What does that mean? Most predator species are ambush hunters or sprinters. They strike quickly and either succeed or move on. Humans hunted by pursuing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Her eyes took on that calculating look again. We're not built for quick kills. We're built to track, adapt, and outlast. A distant explosion rocked the ship, followed by the unmistakable sound of Krell war chants. Sarah didn't flinch. "Your cultural briefings probably told you humans abhor violence because we're physically incapable of matching other species," she continued. "The truth is more complicated. We avoid violence not from incapacity, but experience." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a forearm laced with thin white scars and a small tattoo. An earth wolf surrounded by unfamiliar script. "Humanity's recorded history spans roughly 10,000 years," she said. "We've spent over 9,000 of those years at war with ourselves. We've developed weapons that could crack planets, deployed toxins that liquefied organs, and engineered diseases that could wipe out continents." I stared at her small frame with growing unease. "If your species is so violent, why aren't you galactic conquerors?" "Because we learned." She rolled her sleeve down. "The hard way. Most predator species evolve restraint, instinctual limits on killing their own kind. Humans had to develop those restraints culturally, through devastating trial and error." The makeshift device suddenly emitted a series of tones. Sarah nodded with satisfaction. "What is that?" I asked. "Insurance. I've mapped active Krell communications. 26 warriors originally boarded, organized in standard 5-unit hunting formations, plus a command element." "For what purpose?" "From their communications, this isn't a random raid. They specifically targeted our transport to prevent the Alliance signing. They're executing delegates and capturing others for intelligence extraction." The clinical way she delivered this horrifying news sent a chill through my nervous system. "What can we possibly do against 26 Krell warriors?" Sarah checked the edge of her spike and slipped it back into her sleeve. For the first time, I noticed the hidden sheath built into her diplomatic attire. 25 now, she corrected. "And we don't fight them as a force." "Then how?" She smiled, but the expression contained no warmth, only the cold determination of a predator assessing available paths to its prey. "We hunt them, one by one." Another explosion rocked the ship. The Krell were getting closer. "Rest," she said, moving toward the accessway. "I need to gather more supplies before they lock down this sector. Your leg needs time to heal before you can move effectively. You're leaving me here, alone." She paused at the threshold, silhouetted against the emergency lighting. In that moment, she didn't look small or fragile at all. "Don't worry, Vextrol. The wolves always return for their pack. Time passes differently when you're waiting to die." I drifted between alert vigilance and exhausted unconsciousness, my system struggling to repair the damage to my carapace. 12 hours passed before Sarah returned. She appeared silently from a ventilation shaft I hadn't even noticed, her once pristine diplomatic uniform now stained with multiple shades of alien blood. She carried a makeshift pack bulging with salvaged equipment. "Status report?" I asked, the formal query slipping out from my military training. 3 fewer Krell," she replied matter-of-factly, kneeling to check my wound. "I've mapped their patrol patterns and located the surviving delegates. They're being held in the primary cargo bay. The casual way she announced eliminating 3 elite warriors, a feat that would earn an Azuran immediate elevation to the warrior caste, struck me as more terrifying than the blood on her clothing. How? I couldn't help asking. She unpacked her scavenged supplies, medical items, tools, ration packs, and communication devices. The first one was inspecting hull damage in Section 7. I redirected coolant from a ruptured line into his breathing apparatus. Her tone suggested she was discussing nothing more significant than diplomatic scheduling. The second and third were sweeping the hydroponics bay. I introduced them to the concept of high-voltage irrigation systems. I stared at her. You didn't engage them directly. Why would I? She examined a stolen Krell communicator. Direct confrontation favors their physiology, not mine. She handed me a nutrient capsule compatible with Azuran biology. As I consumed it, she continued preparing equipment with mechanical precision. Humans developed civilization without the natural advantages other species possess. She explained, splicing wires from different devices. No claws, no armor, no venom. We compensated with pattern recognition and tool use. Your xenobiology files indicated those traits evolved for foraging, not combat. Sarah's lips curved slightly. Our academics prefer that interpretation. Reality is less comfortable. We developed those skills hunting megafauna that could crush us with a single step. When those same skills proved effective against rival human groups, we refined them. She activated the splice device, which emitted a soft hum. This will disrupt Krell communications in a 50-meter radius. They'll attribute it to damage from their own bombardment. A distant crash followed by Krell battle cries echoed through the bulkheads. Sarah tilted her head, listening. They're frustrated, she observed, executing a standard Quadrant 5 sweep pattern, but adapting it poorly to the ship's layout. How can you know their tactics so well if humans have no official contact with Krell? She continued working, because militaries develop predictable doctrines based on their physiological advantages. Krell are physically powerful, with excellent vision but poor peripheral awareness. Their tactics emphasize overwhelming force in frontal assault. And humans. Something flickered in her eyes, not quite pride, but awareness of capability. We're objectively weaker, with average visual acuity, but exceptional pattern recognition. We develop tactics that turn opponents' strength against them. She secured the communications disruptor to her belt. In Earth's history, smaller forces routinely defeated larger ones by exploiting environmental factors and psychological vulnerabilities. Another crash, closer this time. Sarah glanced toward the sound, then at my injured leg. Can you move? I tested my damaged limb. The medical patch had accelerated healing, though pain still radiated from the fracture. If necessary. It's about to become necessary. She helped me stand, supporting more of my weight than should have been possible for her frame. They're changing their search pattern, becoming more thorough. This location is compromised. She guided me toward a maintenance tunnel barely large enough for my thorax. The next 12 hours are critical. The Krell will realize their missing warriors aren't responding and escalate their tactics. What's your strategy? I asked as we crawled through the claustrophobic passage. Psychological warfare, she replied from ahead. Krell society emphasizes strength and dominance. They respect opponents who confront them directly, and are unsettled by those who won't fight on their terms. We emerged into a junction of service corridors. Sarah oriented herself instantly, leading us deeper into the ship's damaged infrastructure. I'll continue eliminating perimeter guards and sabotaging ship systems, she explained, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty. Unpredictable failures, unexplained disappearances, apparent malfunctions that are too convenient to be coincidental. To what end? She stopped at a sealed hatch, punching in an override code she couldn't possibly have known. To make them afraid. The hatch slid open to reveal a small monitoring station filled with diagnostic equipment. This auxiliary engineering station is shielded from standard scans, she said, helping me inside. You'll be safe here while I continue preparations. Preparations for what? Sarah checked the power levels on her stolen Krell equipment. For making them realize their greatest strength is actually a vulnerability. As she prepared to leave again, I caught her arm. A breach of diplomatic protocol with most species, but I needed to understand. We're two beings against a Krell assault team, I said. Even with your skills, those aren't survivable odds. Sarah didn't pull away, but something changed in her posture. A subtle shift that reminded me predators are most dangerous when still. That's the fundamental difference in our thinking, Vextrol, she said quietly. You see 22 Krell warriors as an unstoppable force. I see 22 individuals who can be isolated, confused, and defeated. Her confidence wasn't bravado or delusion. It was the calm certainty of a hunter who had already mapped every step of the chase. Rest, she said, gently extracting her arm from my grip. Tomorrow, we begin the real hunt. I monitored the Krell communications from our hidden outpost, translating their increasingly erratic transmissions for Sarah. My linguistic implants could decipher their military dialect, which relied heavily on subsonic frequencies that human hearing couldn't detect. They've implemented triple warrior patrols, I informed her as she returned from another expedition. Minimum safe distance between units set at 5 meters. Sarah nodded, unslinging her growing collection of repurposed equipment. They're adapting. That's to be expected. She seemed smaller in the harsh emergency lighting, exhausted after 36 hours of continuous activity. Yet her movements remained precise, her focus unwavering. She claimed 4 more Krell since our relocation, bringing her total to 7. The remaining 15 had grown cautious. You need rest, I observed. Later, she began disassembling a Krell atmospheric filter. What else are they saying? I hesitated. They're not using standard military protocols anymore. Their communications include references to ancestral protection rites, religious invocations. Sarah's hands paused momentarily. Fascinating. What specifically? They speak of a shadow walker that wears the form of prey. Some warriors are marking their armor with defensive sigils. For the first time, Sarah smiled, not the practiced diplomatic expression, but something primal that reminded me of ancient cave predators from my homeworld. Fear, she said softly. It's working. She extracted a small component from the filter and added it to another jury-rigged device, whose purpose I couldn't determine. Krell society glorifies direct combat, she explained. Their mythology centers on heroic warriors defeating physically imposing enemies. They have no cultural framework for an opponent that refuses to be seen, that won't match strength against strength. You're not just killing them, I realized. You're undermining their worldview. Precisely. She connected power leads to her new creation. Military doctrine is built on shared beliefs about how combat works. I'm violating those beliefs systematically. A priority alert pulsed through the Krell communication band. I translated it immediately. They found 3 more dead warriors. Environmental system malfunction in the crew quarters. I couldn't keep the shock from my voice. But you've been here for the past hour. Sarah's expression remained neutral. Time device, set up yesterday during their shift rotation. 10 warriors eliminated, and she'd never directly fought a single one. The Krell commander is initiating a ship-wide security protocol. I continued, monitoring the transmissions. All remaining warriors to report to Central Command for new orders and ritual cleansing. Good, Sarah said, finishing her device. They're centralizing. Makes the next phase easier. The ruthless efficiency in her tone sent a shiver through my sensory appendages. This creature, this human who spoke softly in diplomatic meetings and appreciated aesthetic beauty, had systematically dismantled an elite Krell assault force through methods that seemed more akin to calculated assassination than warfare. Sarah, I said carefully, your approach to combat is unlike anything in recorded Azuran military doctrine. Different evolutionary pressures, different solutions. She checked the charge on her makeshift weapon. Krell evolved from apex predators with few natural enemies. They fight to demonstrate dominance. Azurans evolved from hive defenders with exoskeletons. You fight to protect territory through overwhelming force. And humans, we evolved as middle-tier omnivores surrounded by faster, stronger predators. Her voice grew distant, as though reciting something learned long ago. We learned to run when necessary, hide when possible, and kill when required, using whatever methods ensured survival. A new transmission crackled through the Krell band, longer, more formal than the military communications. The commander addressing his troops. As I translated, my mandibles clicked in disbelief. The Krell commander is performing some kind of exorcism ritual. He's declaring you a spirit of chaos rather than a living opponent. Sarah's expression shifted subtly. Dehumanization. Classic psychological response when reality doesn't match expectation. They can't accept that a physically inferior being is defeating them, so they reclassify me as something supernatural. She checked the time on a salvage display. How many warriors remain with the commander? 12 gathered in the command center. They've taken the captured delegates there as well. Sarah nodded, finalizing preparations for her next move. She'd recovered enough Azuran-compatible medical supplies to stabilize my injury, allowing limited mobility. It's time you learned how humans fight as a unit, she said, handing me a modified Krell sidearm. Can you operate this? I examined the weapon. She'd reconfigured the grip to accommodate Azuran appendages. Yes, but I'm a diplomat, not a warrior. So am I. She secured her equipment and moved toward the exit. But today we're something else. What? She glanced back, her silhouette framed in the doorway. Beyond her small frame, the darkened corridors of the crippled ship stretched like a hunting ground prepared for her specific talents. Survivors, she answered simply. And in human history, that's always been our most dangerous role. The ship's maintenance tunnels formed a labyrinth around the command center. Sarah moved through them with the ease of someone following a mental map, pausing occasionally to place small devices at junction points. Sensor scramblers, she explained when she caught my questioning gaze. They'll create false readings on Krell motion detectors. We reached a vertical shaft where several system conduits intersected. Sarah secured a makeshift harness around my thorax and helped me navigate the narrow passage. The command center has 3 access points, she whispered as we climbed. Primary bridge entrance, emergency evacuation route, and maintenance access. All will be heavily guarded. Then how will we? We won't use any of them. A sardonic chirp escaped my mandibles, the Azuran equivalent of a humorless laugh. Are we to materialize inside like your spirit form the Krell believe in? Sarah's lips curved slightly. Almost. She tapped the bulkhead beside us. This atmospheric circulation shaft runs directly above the command center. The Krell modified their patrol routes, but haven't secured the environmental systems. Because no species could navigate such confined spaces, I pointed out, especially while carrying weapons. No species they've encountered before, Sarah corrected, producing a circular cutting tool fashioned from Krell equipment. We reached a junction where the shaft widened slightly. Sarah activated her communicator disruptor and began cutting through the bulkhead with methodical precision. The metal yielded with minimal sound, another example of her uncanny ability to repurpose technology. As she worked, a new transmission cut through our disruptor's interference. The voice carried authority beyond standard Krell command patterns. I translated automatically. Attention all units. This is Supreme Commander Grathul. I have assumed control of this operation. The hunt for the human anomaly is now under my direct supervision. Sarah paused momentarily. New player. Grathul the Unyielding, I explained, mandibles clicking with concern. Elite Krell commander, veteran of 17 campaigns. His tactics are taught in Azuran war colleges. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Sarah's face. Specialist. Counterinsurgency. He crushed the Arcturus rebellion by adapting to guerrilla tactics. I hesitated. He's known for understanding how other species think. Sarah absorbed this information silently, then resumed cutting. Every predator has blind spots. We'll find his. The bulkhead panel came free, revealing a narrow gap overlooking the command center. Sarah secured it carefully, then produced a fiber optic viewer, another improvised tool. She surveyed the scene below. 12 warriors arranged in defensive formation, she reported. 6 delegates secured near the central console. Command platform elevated at the far end. She passed me the viewer. Through it, I saw the command center transformed into a Krell war chamber. Ritual markings covered the walls. In the center stood Grathel, 8 feet of armored killing efficiency, his carapace bearing the scars of countless victories. Their defensive position is flawless, I observed. No approach vector offers tactical advantage. Sarah retrieved the viewer, studying the scene with scientific detachment. Conventional approaches, no, but they're still thinking like Krell. She unpacked her collected devices, arranging them in precise order. Tell me about Grathel's previous campaigns. How specifically does he counter guerrilla tactics? As I recounted the commander's methods, his use of specialized tracking units, psychological operations, and environmental manipulation, Sarah's expression grew increasingly focused. She wasn't intimidated by his reputation. She was analyzing it for exploitable patterns. He adapts to enemy tactics but remains fundamentally Krell, she concluded. Still believes in strength, dominance, and direct confrontation. He's just more sophisticated about forcing enemies into his preferred battlefield. How does that help us? We're outnumbered, outgunned, and now facing an enemy specifically trained to counter your methods. Sarah removed her diplomatic insignia, the last remnant of her previous identity, and used it to secure a wire connection. In human military history, we studied a concept called the certainty trap. The more confident a commander is in their understanding of the enemy, the more vulnerable they become to radical deviations from expected behavior. She assembled her final device, a compact package combining elements from all her previous creations. Grathel excels at countering insurgents because he forces them to become predictable. He narrows their options until they must fight on his terms. The device hummed to life in her hands. But humans developed warfare in environments where rules constantly changed. What's your plan? I asked, still unable to see how two beings could overcome such odds. We won't attack the command center, she said, securing the device to the environmental intake. We'll make the command center attack itself. She activated a timer and gestured for me to follow her, moving away from our position with urgent purpose. Grathel expects me to continue eliminating isolated warriors or to attempt a failed direct assault. He can counter both approaches. Her voice was calm despite our rapid retreat. Instead, we'll create a scenario no counterinsurgency doctrine addresses. A distant rumble shook the passageway. Emergency alarms activated throughout the ship. What did you do? I demanded. Introduced the ship's atmospheric processors to the concept of positive feedback loops, she answered as the rumbling intensified. The command center is about to experience some interesting environmental changes. As if on cue, chaos erupted in the Krell communications. Warriors shouted about system malfunctions, atmospheric pressure fluctuations, and sensor failures, all happening simultaneously. Sarah's expression remained impassive, but I finally understood what truly made humans different from every other species I'd encountered. It wasn't their physiology or their technology. It was their capacity to create and control chaos. Alarms wailed as we positioned ourselves near the command center's emergency exit. The atmospheric disruption had triggered multiple system failures, creating cascading malfunctions throughout the ship's infrastructure. Through the Krell communication band, I could hear Grathel issuing precise commands, adapting to the crisis with remarkable speed. He's stabilizing the situation, I warned Sarah. Implementing emergency protocols, rerouting essential systems. Sarah nodded as if she'd anticipated this. Phase 1 complete, then. He's focused inward, committing resources to counter an environmental threat. You expected him to neutralize your attack. It wasn't an attack. It was a distraction. She checked the timer on another device trapped to her wrist, and a way to identify his priority systems. The ship shuddered as something exploded deep within its bowels. The Krell communications erupted with urgent reports. Hull breach in Section 12. I translated. 2 warriors dispatched to contain it. Sarah's eyes gleamed in the emergency lighting. Perfect. They're splitting their forces. I finally understood her strategy. The atmospheric disruption wasn't meant to incapacitate the command center. It was designed to force Grathel to reveal his contingency plans, to show how he allocated resources under pressure. Now we move to Phase 2, she said, activating her last remaining devices. Throughout the ship, secondary explosions detonated in precise sequence. Not random destruction, but a carefully orchestrated pattern that targeted systems Grathel had just prioritized. As his warriors deployed to address each new crisis, they were drawn along specific routes, paths that led them exactly where Sarah wanted them. You've been planning this since you first started exploring the ship, I realized. Mapping choke points, identifying critical systems, preparing contingencies. She checked the modified Krell weapon she'd given me. Humans learned warfare by studying terrain and using it as a weapon. This ship is just another battlefield with its own topography. Through the communication band, I heard something unexpected. Grathel's voice, tinged with genuine confusion. The human isn't behaving according to established patterns, he growled to his lieutenants. These attacks lack signature consistency. Analyze for multiple hostiles. Sarah smiled thinly. He thinks we're different people. Good. How are we proceeding? I asked, adjusting my grip on the unfamiliar weapon. The remaining warriors are now distributed throughout the ship. 4 remain with Grathel, guarding the delegates. She checked her improvised blade. We'll use their evacuation protocol against them. Their what? The Lit Krell commanders have a standard procedure when operations deteriorate beyond salvage. They extract high-value assets through predetermined escape routes. She gestured to our position beside the emergency exit, like this one. The door beside us suddenly hummed with activity. Sarah pulled me into a recessed maintenance panel seconds before it slid open. 4 Krell warriors emerge, weapons ready, creating a protective formation around a 5th figure, Grathel himself. Behind them came 2 warriors escorting the captive delegates. Sarah touched my arm, signaling for patience. The procession moved past our hiding spot, proceeding down the corridor exactly as she had predicted. They're heading for the auxiliary shuttle bay, I whispered, where they'll find their escape craft mysteriously disabled, she replied, forcing them to take the secondary route through Maintenance Section 6, which you've prepared somehow. Rather than answer, she glanced at her timer. 3 seconds later, the ship's gravity generators failed spectacularly. The sudden transition to zero-G sent the Krell formation into momentary disarray. They were heavy worlders, their combat doctrine built around leveraging their mass. Now, Sarah said, launching herself from our hiding place with the frictionless grace of someone trained for zero-gravity operations. What followed was unlike any combat I had witnessed in my military career. The Krell warriors fired their weapons, but Sarah moved between them with impossible agility, using their own bulk as pivot points. In the weightless environment, their strength and mass became hindrances rather than advantages. I provided covering fire as Sarah had instructed, forcing the warriors to divide their attention. She struck with surgical precision, not killing blows, but targeted attacks on mobility joints and sensory organs, incapacitating rather than eliminating. 3 warriors disabled in seconds. The 4th managed to catch Sarah with a glancing blow that sent her spinning toward a bulkhead. I expected Grathel to press the advantage, but instead, he secured the delegates and retreated, demonstrating the tactical acumen that had made him legendary. Let them go, Sarah gasped, arresting her momentum on a protruding conduit. Blood flowed from a cut above her eye, the first injury I'd seen her sustain. He's escaping with the hostages, I protested. He's moving exactly where I need him to be. She checked her timer again. Gravity returns in 40 seconds. Be ready. As predicted, the artificial gravity re-engaged with a shudder, dropping us unceremoniously to the deck. Sarah landed in a controlled roll despite her injury, instantly orienting toward our objective. Grathel is adapting to each scenario, I observed as we pursued. He's recognized your pattern disruption technique. Yes, she agreed, moving with renewed purpose. He's shifting to his contingency protocols. Isn't that problematic for your plan? Sarah's expression hardened into something ancient and calculating, the look of a predator who had maneuvered its prey precisely where it wanted. Grathel believes he's identifying my patterns and countering them, she said. He doesn't realize all his contingencies are leading to the same destination. Which is the one place on this ship where physical strength means nothing. For the first time, her voice carried an edge of grim satisfaction. The killing floor of my choosing. We tracked Grathel to the environmental control nexus, a cramped chamber filled with processing equipment that regulated the ship's life support systems. The space was barely large enough for the Krell commander and the 2 delegates he still held hostage. His remaining warrior stood guard at the only entrance. Sarah observed the situation through a maintenance grate, her expression unreadable. "This is your killing floor," I whispered. "He's cornered, but still dangerous." "He's not cornered. He's exactly where he believes he should be." She wiped blood from her eye. "This nexus connects to an auxiliary craft docking port, standard Krell extraction protocol for high-value assets. Then he'll escape with the hostages." "No." She checked her makeshift weapons one final time. "He won't." Without further explanation, Sarah activated her communication disruptor and moved toward the entrance. I followed, covering her flank as she'd instructed. The guard detected our approach instantly, raising his weapon. Sarah made no attempt at stealth or evasion. Instead, she stepped directly into the corridor, hands visibly empty. "Commander Grathel," she called out, her voice carrying that diplomatic cadence I remembered from the conclave meetings. "I believe we should discuss terms." The guard hesitated, confused by her sudden shift in tactics. Inside the nexus, Grathel's massive form appeared in the doorway. "The Shadow Stalker reveals itself," he rumbled, compound eyes studying Sarah with predatory intensity. "You abandon your hunt to attempt negotiation." "I'm a diplomat by profession, Commander." Sarah stood relaxed, unthreatening. Violence was never my preference. Grathel's mandibles clicked in what I recognized as Krell amusement. "You slaughtered 15 of my warriors." 16, Sarah corrected calmly. "The last repair team won't be reporting back." I kept my weapon trained on the guard, sensing the tension building. Sarah's strategy escaped me completely. She had abandoned all tactical advantage for this confrontation. "Your deception patterns are transparent, human," Grathel said. "You seek to delay until rescue forces arrive." "No rescue is coming," Sarah replied. "Not for several hours. I simply recognize when a tactical situation has reached its conclusion." She gestured to the environmental nexus behind him. "That auxiliary craft you're attempting to access, I disabled its navigation system 6 hours ago. The docking clamps are fused. Your extraction plan has failed." Grathel's posture shifted subtly, the equivalent of a human frown. "You expect me to believe you predicted my exact fallback position. I didn't predict it. I engineered it." Sarah's voice remained diplomatic, but her eyes had that predatory focus I'd come to recognize. Every system failure, every contingency you deployed, was designed to funnel you to this specific location. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the commander's features. "Why?" "Because the environmental nexus has one critical vulnerability." Sarah glanced at her timer. "The atmospheric recycling system requires regular purging." On cue, warning lights flashed throughout the chamber. Grathel whirled as emergency vents sealed, initiating the automated purge cycle Sarah had mentioned. "Which floods the chamber with paralytic coolant every 6 hours, she finished. The Krell commander roared in fury, realizing the trap too late. He lunged toward Sarah with devastating speed, but she had already anticipated the movement. Sidestepping with preternatural grace, she used his momentum to direct him into the warrior guard. The collision bought precious seconds as the purge cycle completed its startup sequence. Within moments, a fine mist filled the Nexus chamber. The effects on Krell physiology were immediate. Their movements slowed as the paralytic compounds in the coolant infiltrated their respiratory systems. Sarah moved with calm efficiency, securing the delegates and pulling them clear of the affected area. Graffel fought against the paralysis with remarkable will, dragging himself toward the entrance where we stood. "You fight without honor," he gasped, limbs growing increasingly unresponsive. Sarah knelt beside the fallen commander, her voice pitched for his hearing alone. "Honor is a luxury of the powerful," she said quietly. "Survival is the art of the adaptable." The paralytic completed its work. Graffel lay immobilized but conscious, his eyes tracking Sarah with a mixture of hatred and, most surprisingly, respect. She stood and activated the ship's emergency beacon, which had remained functional despite the damage. "Azuran rapid response vessels will arrive within 60 minutes, she informed me, returning to help secure the delegates. "The paralytic will keep the Krell immobilized for approximately 3 hours, more than enough time." As we moved the delegates to a safe location to await rescue, I found myself studying this human with new understanding. "You never intended to kill Graffel," I realized. "Killing him would create a martyr and escalate tensions," she replied, reverting completely to her diplomatic demeanor. "Capturing him provides intelligence value and potential prisoner exchange opportunities. You were thinking diplomatically even while dismantling his forces." She shrugged slightly. "I told you, violence was never my preference. Just a means when diplomacy is temporarily unavailable." 3 days later, aboard the Azuran diplomatic vessel returning us to Station Harmony, I completed my official report on the incident. Sarah Chen had resumed her role as Earth's senior diplomat, as if the events aboard the crippled ship had never occurred. In meetings, her voice was once again soft, her manner accommodating. But now I saw what lay beneath. When she smiled at the Draxian ambassador who had questioned Earth's resilience, I recognized the predator behind the diplomat's eyes. When she gently suggested compromises that disproportionately benefited Earth's position, I understood the calculated strategy underneath. In my classified addendum to the Azuran High Command, I wrote, "Humanity represents a fundamental challenge to established xenobiological classification. They are not prey species that developed intelligence as a survival mechanism. Nor are they predators who evolved sentience as an extension of hunting instincts. They are something more dangerous, a species that has been both predator and prey throughout their evolution, capable of shifting between these roles seamlessly as circumstances demand. Their preference for diplomatic solutions is genuine, but it is critical to understand that this preference stems not from weakness, but from the devastating efficiency with which they wage war when diplomacy fails. In human historical records, they describe themselves as wolves in sheep's clothing. I believe a more accurate description would be wolves who genuinely prefer being sheep, until the moment they must remind the galaxy why wolves are feared." As I submitted my report, I glanced across the diplomatic chamber where Sarah Chen was engaged in animated discussion with a Mendari trade representative, her hands making those same gentle gestures I had once mistaken for weakness. They had said humans were gentle. They weren't wrong. But now I understood the truth that makes humanity truly unique among the galactic species. Their gentleness is a choice.